We should focus now to the state of the local steel industry, with key player ArcelorMittal South Africa set to halt operations at its long steel unit. This despite efforts with the government and stakeholders to defer the closure and impacting over 3,500 jobs. And joining me as we unpack the move in great detail is mining analyst Peter Major. Peter, thanks so much for joining us today. Now, as mentioned, this isn't the first time AMSA's decided to close down the Longs unit. In 2023, AMSA made a similar announcement, but those plans were put on ice after it faced pushback from the government and Labour. With that being said, does this move come as a surprise?
No, it doesn't, because they gave reasons that they were looking at closing this section last year. And the reasons are still all valid. And we can reiterate them if it helps the audience. You know, the reason is high costs. Our electricity costs, as we know, have gone through the roof year after year here for decades. And there's other costs, transport costs. You know, our rail system here has been falling apart for decades. So the cost of rail is going up year after year. And if you're making long products, one of the long products you're making is rail. But this country is not expanding its rail like a growing country like China. We are deindustrializing. We've had probably 10 to 12,000 kilometers of tracks, now reduced to barely 4,000 kilometers of tracks. So there's plenty of used rail. You know, we're not buying rail, we are deindustrializing. And a lot of the steel went to mining companies, mine shafts. You know, a shaft takes a lot of steel going all the way down it and inside the mine. But we've closed most of our gold mines. They used to take so much steel that ISCOR couldn't keep up, that Anglo's even had to build their own steel plant. So our whole industrial policy has led us to deindustrialization. We're going backwards. So poor ISCOR, they could barely sell 2.5 million tons, and they were originally designed for 10 million tons. And we'd stripped away what the company once was. It was a mining leviathan up until the 90s. It had its own coal mines. It had its own base metal mines. It had manufacturing plants, iron ore mines. And we took that away from it. So the people that ran our government decided they would break it up, even though it employed 75,000 people at its peak. Now it's down to a few thousand, and it just can't survive this kind of toxic environment as just a steel producer.
Let's talk about some of the structural reforms, because it does seem like at the heart of some of AMSA's issues is, you know, change and policy change within the government, right? So we've seen the end of load shedding, but electricity prices are high, as you've mentioned. We do have a recovery plan in motion at Transnet. So those logistics issues also being addressed. What can the government do, or what process can they speed up to actually then boost the local steel industry, I guess?
I'm looking for an appropriate analogy. And this is like somebody, like some of Stalin's generals and leaders who created his rocket program, Korolev. If you beat the people senselessly, day after day, week after week, month after month, year, you've starved them, you've subjected them to slave labor. And then one day you say, hey, I really need you. I need you here helping me build spacecraft to compete with the West. Sure, you can rehabilitate the guy, give him a better diet, release him from those bad conditions. But he's taken so much strain over those decades. And unfortunately, our policies and our legislation, they started in the mid-90s. So that was 30 years ago. So we would need to revamp our complete policy. You know, how are we going to put Eskom back to where it was 20, 30 years ago? How are we going to get Transnet back there? How are we going to get the tariffs? We had the right balance of tariffs that protected our local industry, but still allowed enough competition that they kept our industry competitive. And our industries were competitive. They were benchmarked against world best. We could compete with most of the world here up until the 90s. So the changes government would have to make to allow ISCOR, they're too enormous. You know, the capitalization, government put in billions and billions for years to build what it was. So we've stripped that away, and it's corroded away what we didn't strip away. And government doesn't have the knowledge or the resources to build this score what it once was.
I'm getting a sense that you don't think that we might get back to where that industry once was, right?
Never, no. It would take decades.
Yeah. Let's take a look at the labor aspect of it all. I mean, about 3,500 jobs, indirect and direct, could be lost from this closure. This is not, a pretty number, I guess, quite scary considering where our unemployment numbers sit as well. I'm sure they're going to face, AMSA is going to face, the brutality of labor and unions when it comes to this.
Well, if you look at the severance pay numbers, they're huge. They're in the billions. So that still doesn't make up for losing your job.
Yeah.
Some people, they'll take that severance pay. Maybe they're ready to retire. But most of us, we don't want the retrenchment pay. We're in that job because we like it. Our lives revolve around that job. And these are good blue-collar jobs. You can get a bank loan when you got a job like that. You can buy a house. You can put your kids through a good school. You can plan your life when you've got jobs like that. So I know what it's like to lose those kind of jobs. It's horrible. And to lose them in an economy that's not growing, to lose them in an economy that has horrible legislation that prevents the growth and foreign investment from coming here, that's terrifying. If you lose your job in a country that's growing, it's a jolt, but you'll survive and you'll find something else. But here, it's really like being cast in the wilderness. It's terrifying. I feel for those men.
Really concerning, considering, of course, that unemployment number. It'll be interesting to see how CEO Cobus Verster navigates this situation. Peter, thanks so much for your time and joining us today. That was Peter, major mining analyst from Modern Corporate Solutions.